The Hilleberg Enan. That one. What an awesome tent. If you've read my blog, Ultralight and Comfortable, you know I've done a review of the Hilleberg Enan. I did this last year, I think last April or May. And I had used the tent for about 6 months when I wrote that review. And you know, I ended up selling it, moving on and doing some other things, and now you see it's back in the arsenal, but that's mainly because I have a backpacking shop and I love the tent, so I decided I would bring it back. I wanted to do a review of the Enan because it is an awesome tent, and I think that a lot of people stare at the fact that it's 1.2 kilos and they're thinking, oh, that's so heavy. But let's be realistic, that's 1.2 kilos with the hoop, the stuff sacks, the guidelines, and the tent pegs. So that's not 1.2 kilos excluding that. And that's something I really like about, and you don't have to seam seal it. So, you know, most tents you gotta add at least 50 grams to 100 grams just in seam sealer. So that's 1.2 kilos complete. Now, for comparison, the Lunar Solo is 700 grams as it is now. It hasn't been seam sealed yet. The Lunar Solo is about 700 grams, and then with the trekking pole, that particular trekking pole weighs 160 grams. So it's 850 grams, so definitely lighter and a lot more versatile if you use trekking poles. If you don't use trekking poles, 1.2 is a pretty good option. Now, as I've said in the review, it is fairly easy to set up. It takes, well, in my written review, I said that it takes two pegs and the pole, and you're pretty much done. But I was kind of making it a simplistic equivalence, I guess. I was making, you know, I mean, you can put it up with two pegs and the pole, but not really. I was just, you know, whatever. Anyway, it's actually closer to 6 pegs that you need to set it up, which for me I think is a bit overkill. But the reason is because it has, you know, you have to set up the 2 poles, the 2 pegs there, and then you have the 1 peg sticking out, so that's your 3 pegs there, and you have to do the same over there if you want to get a really good pitch on it. But with that said, 6 pegs and the hoop, it's a fantastic tent. You know, Hillebergs are just known for quality, and the Enan's no exception. I don't want to talk about condensation because all tents have a lot of condensation. Even tarp open has condensation if the temperature's wrong or right, depending on how you look at it. So I'm not going to talk about condensation. If you do use trekking poles, the Enan's pretty pointless. Because then you're looking at the tent itself at 1.2, and then on top of that, trekking poles, which is another 300 grams at least. So you're carrying 1.5 kilos when you wouldn't need to. Now, if Hilleberg would make a trekking pole style Enan, depending on the weight, of course. So I'll go ahead and get in and show the Hilleberg Enan, just to give you an idea. Yeah, so now I'm here, more or less inside of the Enan, and the Enan has great floor space for its size. Not for the weight, but for the size. It's a small tent that has a very tight footprint, which is great, especially if you're doing a lot of varied kind of camping and so on. It comes seam sealed. Can't beat that, because seam sealing, I think, for a lot of people is a pain in the ass, and in some tents it's worth just to pay the extra to get it seam sealed by a professional, like by the people selling it. So hats off. You know, I wish the other companies would just sell their tents seam sealed, add another 20-30 bucks and just have it done. For me, the Enan is the smallest as far as headroom, and you know, it's pretty much only over the loop, and I'm still, you know, touching the ceiling. Now if you take out the inner tent, then of course you would have a lot more headroom, and you know, so just the nature of the beast, I have to compare it with the Octo. The Octo, well, I liked the Hilleberg Octo, but I hated it. I hated it because it sagged, the inner pole, because the two hanging thingies that held up the inner tent, they were on the sides, here and here, which means that the inner tent was here. Always. I even went in and did some customizations to try and tighten that up. I hated it. And on top of that, the Octo weighed 1.7 kilos. You can kind of see the difference with the Enan. There's a lot of headroom, and that's my head on a pillow. And look at my feet. You know, just the design of it means that my head and my feet don't touch. And I'm 190, so you know, if you're, I guess, 195, then there's probably a risk. If you're 195, then there's probably a risk that either your head or your toes are going to touch. Something's going to touch somewhere. But just the design means that it's better. It's a big inner tent. If you're stuck in shit weather, I mean, it's big enough, right? It's got the inner tent is big. You're not going to be able to sit up. You're not going to be able to do gymnastics like you would be able to do in a pyramid tent. But if you're not using trekking poles and you're looking for an easy, tight, small, single-man tent, then the Enan's a great option. So I certainly wouldn't do something like the PCT with the Hilleberg Enan. It's just too heavy for that kind of use. Even if I was using trekking poles, or not using trekking poles, I still wouldn't bring the Enan. But if I were to hike, you know, and I have a lot of camera gear, so I'm not going to bring trekking poles, and I'm going to be up in northern Sweden, or in maybe walking across Scotland, you know, in the shittiest time of the year, then I could definitely see the Enan as being a great choice. You know, you'll probably never have to replace it if you've accepted the weight and you've kind of accepted that you're not going to use trekking poles and you're okay with some of the limitations. Then it is a tent that you can be happy with, just because of the sheer quality of it. So yeah, the Hilleberg Enan.